We're looking for our instructor, Lieutenant Taylor. Could you tell us where to find him? That's him up there.
Yes, sir. Okay, I'll stow this gear and meet you in the ready room in 10 minutes.
Thank you, sir. See, that's Bob Taylor. I've seen him in pictures.
You won't have to worry about that when you get to sea state.
You sure gave it the works up there, sir. You suppose we'll ever be able to do that, sir?
Oh, sure you will. I know how you feel. I remember how I felt when I was right where you fellas are, just starting primary training. Hasn't been too long ago, either. Yeah, I know how it is. You joined the Navy because you wanted to fly. But instead of flying, pretty soon you found yourself doing things that didn't seem to have any connection with flying. What you didn't realize was that the obstacle course, for example, had been carefully planned to increase your agility. The hours of boxing and wrestling you put in gave you an aggressiveness that every Navy pilot must have. You probably couldn't see what swimming had to do with flying. Being able to swim might someday save your life. Marching was just a preliminary to the air discipline you would ultimately experience in formation flying. Then, the recreation is hike 15 or 20 miles. Plenty tough going, you thought, but being able to take it in stride might someday mean your survival after a jungle crack-up. You studied bed making, mathematics, recognition, a lot of other things. There's good reasons for all of them. Perhaps the most important is the fact that the foundation of every naval officer is physical fitness.
You have a good memory, sir.
Is it really pretty tough, this primary training?
Well, if you mean does it take hard work, yes. But if you mean is flying itself tough, no. When you get the right approach, flying is relatively simple. Because the airplane is of value only as a platform. Some are platforms for guns. Some are platforms for bombs. Or depth charges. Or torpedoes. Some carry men and equipment. Some are for observation. Just as a battleship is merely a convenient floating platform, so the airplane is a convenient airborne platform. Take the carrier pilot, for instance. Flying's only a small part of his job. He has to get his plane safely to his objective. To do this, he has to navigate correctly. And even if he's pretty good at it, that's almost a full-time job in itself. He must stand a 360-degree watch at all times, or an enemy plane may shoot him down before he even sees it. He must watch the ocean for enemy ships. When he reaches his objective, he must deliver his blow at the enemy and at the same time keep himself and his plane from being shot up. tiny moving speck in thousands of miles of open ocean. There isn't enough gas for second guessing. And all the while, he must be on the alert for attacking enemy planes.
But what I've always wondered is, how can he do all that and fly the plane too?
Because the combat pilot handles the mechanics of flying as easily and as naturally as you handle the mechanics of walking. His senses are so keenly developed and so attuned to the airplane that he can fly with 90% of his attention on something else. Still know exactly what his plane's doing all the time. That's what the cadet has to learn to do before he can become a combat pilot.
Look at those F-6F.
Primary training, you don't just learn to fly yellow perils. You learn to fly airplanes. Any and everything with wings on it. Because when you can fly the yellow peril and fly it well, any other plane is just another kite. The operational planes just have more gadgets with which you have to be familiar. As far as the actual flying goes, the only difference is that the big planes go faster and way more. Of course, you fellows probably think of flying as something entirely strange and new. But actually, you've been learning to fly ever since you started learning to walk. Ever notice how babies learn to walk? First, they get interested in their feet, in the mechanics of walking. They don't make much progress. Then one day they get the complete picture of where they are and where they want to go. They forget all about their feet and really walk. Because they forget about the mechanics of walking and put their minds on the ultimate objective. You were learning to fly when you first learned to ride a scooter. Maybe you didn't know enough to bank the first time you went around a corner, so you fell over on the outside of the curve. Or maybe you banked it too much and fell off on the inside. But after a while, you got so you could tell by the feel of it whether you were banking right. Well, in flying an airplane, you use that same sense of balance you learned from riding the scooter. You were learning to fly when you learned to ride a bicycle. You added to that sense of balance, of the right feel of the thing when you banked for a turn. You rode with other fellows, maybe. That was formation riding. Not too different from formation flying. If you rode enough, you got the feel of your bicycle so it was almost a part of you. Like most fellows, you probably drive a car. But can you think back to the day when you first started to learn to drive? Remember how hard it seemed? You wondered if you'd ever be able to jump into the car and drive like the kid next door. You had trouble remembering which gear was which, occasionally with almost disastrous results. In a surprisingly short time, you forgot all about the gear shift and the steering wheel, which pedal was the clutch and which the brake. And as the business of driving became more and more automatic, it was possible to devote most of your attention to matters much more important than the mere mechanics of operating a car. By now, you really had the feel of it. Yes, you've been learning to fly all your life because flying isn't so different from the things you're used to. Where how could the Wright brothers have flown in the first place? Matter of fact, they probably didn't know as much about flying as you fellows do right now. Essentially, there's not such a great difference between driving an automobile and flying a plane. When you're driving a car, you can see ahead of you the road you're going to travel. All you have to do is follow it. In flying a plane, there is no path for you to follow. Don't let that worry you. You'll soon learn to create that path in your mind, so you see it as clearly in your imagination as you see the highway ahead when you're traveling in an automobile. No matter where you fly or what you want to make your airplane do, your mind will form that mental path ahead to take you safely past obstacles. That mental path will guide you through acrobatic maneuvers, bring you in for well-executed landings. It won't be long after you start your training that you begin thinking ahead. So your path is always out there, planned, well in advance of your plane.
You mean you get so you can actually visualize the road up there ahead of you?
That's what it amounts to. Nothing so unusual about it. It works on the ground, too. You probably know people who never could learn to park in a tight space. Somebody told them that if they'd start cutting the wheel at a certain spot and then cut it hard the other way and so on, they'd have no trouble. That'd be fine if all parking spaces were of a standard size. Unfortunately, they're not. He would first look at the space and then visualize the path his car must take to get into that space. He'd have a much better chance of making it on the first try. Ever been to one of those motorcycle riding exhibitions they have at carnivals and fairs? Those fellows have to visualize an exact path if they want to go on living. As a matter of fact, they can give you a pretty good exhibition of the wing over. That's one of the acrobatic maneuvers you'll be doing later on. For some reason, a lot of people have the idea that it takes a Superman to be a naval aviator.
Well, sir, can just anybody learn to fly?
Practically any normal person who has all these faculties and good health. I don't care who you are or what your background. You've been doing things all your life that will help you with your flying. Take stalls and spins, for instance. We've had students come in here with a deathly fear of them, whereas actually they're both perfectly safe and simple maneuvers. You just don't want to run into the ground while executing them. As a matter of fact, you're already familiar with some of the symptoms of a stall. You learned about them from your bicycle. When you start up a grade on your bicycle, if you don't pedal, you lose speed. You see the bicycle's going slower. The wind whistling past your ears quiets down. Pretty soon the bicycle gets wobbly, then stalls, falls over. Same way with an airplane. Pull up into the climbing attitude, and unless you add power, your speed will fall off. If you keep the nose in that climbing attitude, you'll soon begin to sense the same stalling conditions you experienced with your bicycle. You can feel the airplane getting ready to stall. The controls get slack and mushy. Don't respond as quickly. The bicycle wobbles, the plane vibrates. Then it stalls, drops off on a wing. In certain cases, it may spin. Of course, one of the best ways to avoid an impending stall in an airplane is to get the nose down. Motorcycle riders use this technique too. If they find they don't have enough speed to maintain their attitude, they put their nose down and pick up whatever speed they need. You've seen speedboats skid when they turn too sharply. Well, an airplane, if improperly flown, will skid through the air in very much the same way that the motorboat skids in the water. On the other hand, the boy falling off his scooter on the inside because he misjudged his turn has his counterpart in the airplane, which slips downward off course because of a poorly flown turn. You see, practically everything you'll do in an airplane is paralleled by something you're already familiar with.
But, sir, aren't there instruments in the plane to tell you whether you're banking right in the turn and whether your speed is right and so on?
Oh, yes, the instruments are there, all right. The time will come when they're all important. Many times your life will depend on it. You'll be able to fly through weather so thick you can't see your wingtips. Yet you'll get there safely because of instruments. In situations like that, your instruments will act as a sort of substitute for your sense of sight. But it isn't practical to use substitutes for your eyes until you've learned to use your eyes themselves in flying. For instance, either of you fellows ever had a motorcycle?
I did. Matter of fact, I still do at home.
Does it have a speedometer on it?
Yes, sir.
Well, when you're going uphill, do you watch the speedometer to see that you're going fast enough to keep from stalling?
Well, no, sir.
I suppose you're going downhill. There's a bad intersection at the bottom. You don't want to get going so fast you can't stop in case a car comes along. You watch the speedometer to be sure you don't get going too fast?
No, sir.
Well, then how do you tell whether you're going too fast or not?
Well, you just know, that's all.
Wow.
Well, sir, by how fast things seem to be going by.
Yeah, and how the wind sounds in your ears.
Just by the way it feels, I guess.
Sure. By sight, sound, and feel, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's how you learn to fly an airplane. As a primary student, when you're learning to land a plane, you'll be so busy trying to keep a straight course and your wings level, and trying to judge just when and where to set her down, you won't have time to move your eyes down into the cockpit. You'll have to judge your airspeed by sight, sound, and feel. And the sooner you learn to do that, the sooner you'll learn to make good landings. But even before that, you'll have to learn how to use your eyes correctly.
Well, sir, how do you mean? How should we use them?
Maybe I can show you. Now, I can stand here and look straight ahead at that radio and still see the writing on this blackboard over here, more than 100 degrees away. I can't read the writing, but I can still see there's writing there. Over on this side, I can see there's someone sitting on that couch. I can't tell who it is or whether he's asleep. From his attitude, it looks like it. Look at the board. How much you see depends almost entirely on how you use your eyes. Now, the average person standing here looking at the radio would see the radio and would probably be conscious of objects within this range. But training will increase your ability to use your entire field of vision, so that eventually you get to the point where you're conscious of objects and movement within this range, even including an area slightly back of your eyes. So you can cover something like 210 of the 360 degrees. So you see, it's a matter of divided attention. You have to learn to be conscious of several things at once, of your entire field of vision. The natural tendency is to concentrate your vision on a single object. And the minute you concentrate your attention too much on one thing, you're narrowing your vision, blotting out everything else. You're doing to yourself exactly what you do to a horse when you put blinders on it. That's one of the principal causes of automobile accidents. The driver gets his gaze fixed on some one thing. He stares at it, and so narrows his vision that he loses all sense of the relationship of his car to the road. The expert driver keeps his gaze moving all the time. He spots a car just behind him. While he may not look directly at it again, he's conscious that it's there. He glances at that intersection with a car approaching. While his gaze moves elsewhere, still that car is within his full field of vision, so that he never actually loses sight of it. To some degree, a good driver develops his sense of sight instinctively. In a good pilot, it must be developed to a very high degree. But sight alone isn't enough. One of the first things you'll learn when you start to fly is to hold the plane in straight and level flight. At first, that'll seem like a pretty hard job. The nose will wander up, or it'll wander down. You'll think you're in level attitude lots of times when you're actually climbing or gliding. But you'll soon find several ways of knowing the attitude of your plane. You'll know by the way the nose looks in relation to the horizon, or by the way the wings look. You'll know by the sound of the engine. When you're in level flight, it'll probably sound something like this. But pull the nose up, you'll hear the difference. Hear it? You can tell it's working harder. On the other hand, put the nose down. Hear the engine speed up. Sounds too fast. Also, you can tell a lot about what your plane's doing by combining your senses of sight and sound with the way the airplane feels to you. The feel of the controls and that seat-of-the-pants feeling flyers sometimes talk about. Suppose you want to put your plane into a glide. Cut the throttle and push your nose down. How far do you push it? You learn to push it down until your eyes tell you it's right for a glide. Till the whistle of the wind through the strut sounds right. Till the glide feels right to you. The nose starts to wander up. The sound of the wind will change. The wings and nose won't look right for a glide in relation to the horizon. You just know that something's wrong. Old-time pilots will say you feel that something's wrong. But they actually mean a combination of all three senses: sight, sound, and feel. Learning to fly the way we want you to learn is a little like learning to type by the touch system. The old-fashioned way of learning to type was by looking at the copy you're typing from, and then at the keyboard to see which keys to hit. That way you must pay attention to both the copy and the keyboard. So you never can become very fast or very efficient. The correct way to learn is to forget about the keyboard entirely by blanking out the keys and referring, when necessary, to a chart. Soon you're hitting the right keys without thinking about them. Your attention remains on the copy all the time. Your fingers find the right keys automatically. Likewise, in learning to fly, if you try to control the attitude of your plane by looking in the cockpit, you give your eyes two jobs to do. And see what's going on outside the cockpit, and must watch the instruments too. Later on, you'll be able to so divide your attention that this will be possible. But in the meantime, too much attention to what's going on inside the cockpit will cut your efficiency. Your landings won't be so good. You can't watch the attitude of the plane, the relationship of plane to ground and horizon and all the other things you should be seeing. Keep your eyes on the instrument panel as well. It's harder for you to fly figure eights around the pylons. It takes too long for you to get your eyes from the general pattern to the instruments and back again. You have more trouble with acrobatics, simply because you're trying to watch two things at once. So naturally, you don't do as well. The well-trained pilot keeps his attention out of the cockpit. He handles the mechanics of flying as easily and as effortlessly as the touch system typist handles the mechanics of typing. He sits relaxed in his cockpit, relaxed but alert. His touch on the controls is as light, but yet as firm, as the touch of a doctor taking a patient's pulse. He's always aware of the general pattern of the ground beneath him. He makes mental notes of all fields or roads where he might be able to land in case of emergency. In formation, he is continually conscious of the position of planes flying with him. He's always on the lookout for other planes in the area. And once he spots them, he keeps track of them as long as they're anywhere near him. He's like a basketball player. The mechanics of handling the ball, of dribbling, are automatic. He sees the entire court. He's aware of the position of the opposition players and his own team. He constantly sees the whole picture. Actually, the finished pilot and his airplane operate as a single unit. The designer of the bicycle didn't plan a two-wheeled vehicle and then decide it would be nice if somebody rode on it. He began with the rider and built the bicycle around him. Likewise, the early designers of the airplane didn't start out by designing a flying machine and then putting a man in it. They started with the man himself and tried to put wings on him so that he could fly like a bird. To the trained aviator of today, the controls of the modern airplane are merely an extension of his own arms and legs, as much a part of him as the wings are part of a bird. When you want to walk from one place to another, you don't have to stop and figure out every movement of your feet and your legs, nor do you consciously decide on an exact path. All that's automatic. And when you can learn to fly an airplane, or learn to make a landing, or shoot a circle, or do a slow roll, or a snap roll, and execute them all with the same effortless ease with which you walk, or a bird flies, then you and the airplane will truly have become one, an efficient, coordinated unit. And you will have achieved the purpose of primary flight training. And will be well on your way toward becoming a United States naval aviator.
Primary training stations have certain things in common. They all have lots of primary trainers, yellow perils or yellow fighters as they're sometimes called. They all have instructors. They all have chief flight instructors who've been in the game long enough that their advice should not be taken lightly. And they all have cadets. Some of the cadets are alert and observing, and others are not.
The chances are you'll never have to use your parachute. But when you need it bad. So don't bang it around. Keep it out of any place where you might get some oil, gasoline, or water on it. Water will slow down the chute's opening. Oil, gasoline, or water will rot the silk, and you'd be surprised how fast you come down in a ripped chute. If you want to be sure your chute will open, always inspect the release pin before you go up. Be sure the pin is not bent and the thread loop has not been broken. You've heard all this before. It's being repeated here because with parachutes, one mistake is one too many. Parachute jumping is the one thing in naval aviation that we don't practice because the first time has to be perfect. Be sure your leg straps are tight. There are a number of sopranos around today who used to sing bass until they bailed out with loose leg straps. One thing more. There's just one way to carry a parachute. Like this. Not by the risers, not bumping against your legs, but like this. Remember that, will you?
So I said to this dame, I says, come on, babe. Let's you and I go down to this little place on the corner and get ourselves a drink. It took some talking, but pretty soon...
Hey, look how you've got that chute. That's not the way you're supposed to carry it.
Oh, there's more than one way of carrying a chute. And besides, I'm not going to have to jump.
Okay, so you're not going to have to jump. But think of the next guy that has to use that chute. You heard what the chief flight said. And he also said there's no smoking on the line.
He's just eager.
Now, as I was saying about this babe, send that man over to my office. Yes, poor Mac. But maybe he's pretty lucky at that. He might have gotten tangled up in the harness and been dragged into a turning propeller. He might have had the chute on and buckled and been unable to get out of it. Of course, there would have been no trouble at all if Mac had been carrying his chute like this, with the chest strap not buckled and the chute itself held firmly under his left arm, where the ripcord is not likely to get caught on anything and the chute is protected. But Mac here has been on the base for a whole week, so he knows all the answers. At least that's what he thinks. His friend Pete, on the other hand, has just arrived here from pre-flight. In fact, as yet, Pete is entirely unfamiliar with the yellow peril. So at this point, his instructor gives him the word on the pre-flight inspection.
The first thing we're going to do today is learn how to inspect the plane.
But, sir, do you mean the pilot has to inspect the plane? I thought the mechs did all that.
Well, they do, but the mechs are pretty busy. Sometimes one mechanic is responsible for several airplanes. Besides, you're the guy that's going to be up there in the plane, not the mech. But before we start the pre-flight inspection, let's talk for a minute about the meat axe. Maybe you call it a propeller, but to experienced pilots, it's the most efficient beef cleaver on Earth. Just imagine the airplane standing there with that bloody bolo poised and ready to smash your brains out if you give it half a chance. Airplanes standing on the line with nobody within 50 feet of them have been known to thrash through a couple of turns just for the hell of it. And if you happen to be in the way, that'll be where you came in and went out. A moment ago, you asked if the pilot inspects the plane. That officer over there is getting ready to go out on a hop. Watch what he does. First, he takes off his parachute and will lay it on the leading edge of the wing, just outboard of the end strut. And he lays it down gently. Why gently?
Yes. Why lay the chute down gently? Mac here can answer that question. Just watch him for a moment. Uh-oh. Wait till the chief flight hears about this.
Our little discussion a moment ago about the propeller will give you some idea why the pre-flight inspection always starts by making sure the switch is off. That's what that fellow's going to do now. The switch on an airplane is somewhat like the ignition switch on an automobile. Sometimes the propeller plays tricks when the switch is off, but much more often when it's on. You've seen automobiles in which the steering wheel could be locked so it wouldn't turn. Well, the controls on an airplane can be locked too, but for a different reason. They're locked with a red handle in the lower left corner of the cockpit. When locked, the controls are held motionless, so the wind won't bang the ailerons around or the elevators and the rudder. So after checking to see that the switch is off, you push the red handle forward and up, and the controls are unlocked. That's all in the cockpit for the moment. And incidentally, when getting in and out of the cockpit, always step on the black catwalk. Otherwise, you're liable to wind up standing on the ground with a wing around your waist. Now you're ready to inspect the airplane. On fabric surfaces, always look for tears or breaks or wrinkles or bulges, which might indicate a structural failure or a broken spar or rib underneath the fabric. Notice anything that seems out of line or not quite right. Start with the trailing edge of the left wing and follow a path like this all the way around the plane. Watch how that fella does it. Notice that he pays particular attention to the aileron, top and underside. Now you see why you unlock the controls before the inspection. Otherwise, you couldn't move the ailerons. Take a quick look at the aileron fittings to be sure they're securely attached and safetied. Check all inspection plates to be sure they're well fastened down. And test the after strut. Glance at the fitting bolt at the base of the strut. And check the wingtip, especially the underside of it, for tears in the fabric. Run your hand along under the edge of the wingtip for structural failures you might not see. Then take a good look at the underside. This part of the inspection requires special attention because wingtips and ailerons are occasionally damaged by someone dragging the wing in such a way that the damage might not be seen by the mechs. While you're at the wingtip, grasp the handhold and test the wing to make sure that the wing panel is completely rigid and securely attached to the fuselage. Listen for anything that sounds like wood splintering or fabric tearing, and watch for wrinkles or bulges. Test the wing firmly but gently. Moving on around to the leading edge, you next inspect the forward strut and the fitting bolt at its base. That little gadget attached to the strut is called the pitot tube. Is connected with the airspeed indicator in the cockpit. The airspeed indicator is the equivalent of the speedometer on an automobile, but it won't work if the pitot tube is covered or stopped up, so you check the tube. Test wires for tautness, but don't pull them too hard or you may damage the spreader, which serves merely to hold the wires in position and keep them from vibrating. At the same time, be sure the spreader is secure. Also, inspect all wires. See that they're streamlined into the wind and not twisted crossways. Check the underside of the wing for tears in the fabric and bulges or wrinkles which might indicate a structural failure. As you move in toward the fuselage, keep one hand on the leading edge of the wing. Habits like that, developed in the beginning, may someday save your life. There are cases where old-time experienced pilots have been killed by propellers because in a thoughtless moment they accidentally got too close. That's the cap to the oil tank he's taking off now. Sometimes there's a metal dipstick attached to the inside of the oil cap. If not, you should be able to see the surface of the oil by looking carefully. If you can't see it, call the plane captain.
Of course, if you're like our friend Mac here, maybe you have unlimited faith in your plane captain, which is all right up to a point. But for Mac, it's just too much bother to check everything. So he skips the oil tank. But one day, Mac, old boy, you'll be up there, solo maybe, and things will happen. planes are funny that way. They won't run without oil.
Also, it's a good idea to see that the cap to the oil tank is on tight. Otherwise, you're liable to find yourself in the airplane well oiled in a very literal sense. Next, the landing gear. That part he's looking at now is called the oleo and serves as a shock absorber. Check the fittings. Be sure the fitting bolts are secure and safetied. And incidentally, when we say a bolt is safetied, we mean it has a wire or cotter key through the end, like this. So even if the nut gets loose, it can't come off. Be sure the oleo is up, like this, not down, like this. Glance at the tires. If they look mushy, ask the plane captain to check them. And around the engine, always watch for signs of dripping gasoline or oil. Oil or gasoline on the pavement under the plane or on the landing gear struts probably indicates a leak and calls for investigation by the plane captain. As a further check, you may want to open the accessory compartment. This is done by loosening a couple of fasteners in the fairing. The gasoline and oil lines run through this compartment, and any leaks will probably be immediately apparent here. And be sure the compartment is securely closed. When this cover comes open during flight, it does strange things to the aerodynamics of the plane. Or it may rip off completely and go flying back, endangering the tail assembly. At this point, you glance quickly at the back of the engine to be sure all is well there. What do you look for? Wires which have become detached. Cracked cylinders or exhaust manifolds. Take hold of the carburetor. Try to shake it. If it's at all loose, the plane isn't airworthy. Now you retrace your steps along the leading edge of the wing, going clear back to the tip. Then forward and in again to a point directly in front of the propeller, but a respectful distance away from it. We can see everything we need to see from here without risking our necks. We can be sure the prop isn't nicked or pitted or cracked. You can check the fitting bolts around the hub. While here, look at the front of the engine for loose wires or cracked cylinders. And notice particularly the spark plug wires to see that they are safetied. From this point, you can get a good look at the entire underside of the fuselage and the underside of the top wing. Here again, look for tears in the fabric or wrinkles or bulges. Check the oleos to see that they are evenly inflated. Notice whether the plane is setting evenly on the ground and is therefore properly balanced. If the landing gear is in any way structurally out of line, you must catch that at this point. Also, see that both wheels are chocked. Now you proceed to the tip of the right wing, still showing the same respect for the propeller. You begin at the wing tip and work in toward the engine, inspecting the same points on the right wing as were covered on the left. You don't open this side of the accessory compartment, but you do check to see that the fairing is fastened down tight. The oleo on this side, the tire, and the back of the engine. Then back to the tip of the wing and around the trailing edge for inspection there, covering the same points that were covered on the other wing. Aft along the fuselage, looking for tears, bulges, or wrinkles. Underneath the tail assembly, first the rudder cable, then the wires for streamlining and tautness. The fabric, and especially the elevator. On top, the fabric and the wires. Inspect fittings on the elevator and the rudder. Turn the rudder for a look at the rudder horn, first on one side and then on the other.
Of course, some pilots like Mac here seem to doubt the importance of inspecting such items as the rudder horn. One small fact seems to have missed friend Mac. An airplane is neither useful nor healthy unless all the controls are in good working order. The rudder horn is in an exposed position. Occasionally, it gets broken. And here's an example of what can happen. Friend Mac, who uses his brakes too much in taxiing anyway, wouldn't notice it even if he had no rudder control at all. All is well, thinks Mac. He pulls around into the takeoff position, locks his tail wheel, and gives her the gun. As we were saying, an airplane isn't very useful or very healthy unless all the controls are in good working order.
If you want to play safe, always inspect both rudder horns and all control cables and control surfaces. Also, inspect the tail wheel for inflation. The tail wheel is held in position by an oleo, which must also be kept inflated. Otherwise, the tail will drop down like this. The tail wheel assembly will not have the shock-absorbing qualities which protect the tail from shock in hard landings. So check this. And then take a good look at the top side of the upper wing. This is about the only place that you can see it from the ground. After inspecting the left side of the tail assembly, proceed up the left side of the fuselage to the baggage compartment. You always open the baggage compartment. What you carry there varies with different stations and different types of planes. But you don't want to carry any unnecessary weight. And should the compartment accidentally come open in flight, you don't want dainty little items like wheel chocks to go spraying out over the landscape. Also, in some types of primary trainers, there should be a first aid kit in this container in the top of the baggage compartment. And be sure the compartment fasteners are secure. Now, you already know what happens to an airplane when it runs out of oil. Well, it won't run without gasoline either. True, you have a gasoline gauge to tell you how much gas is in the tank, but gauges sometimes get stuck, which probably accounts for the old saying among flyers that the best gauge is your finger. So you stand on the seat of the front cockpit, take off the gas cap, and find out for sure whether the tank's full. Never take a plane out that isn't full, right up to the top. And put the cap back on so it'll stay. If it comes off in flight, it may hit you and knock you out. And the high-octane gasoline spraying back on you may burn your skin or injure your eyes, to say nothing of the fire hazard it creates. One other thing. Anytime you're flying solo, always fasten the seatbelt in the empty cockpit and draw it up tight so it won't loop over the stick when you're stunting or inverted. Now, that completes the pre-flight inspection, except for the cockpit, that is. So let's go over here to an airplane and go through the cockpit check. Okay, now before you get in the airplane, buckle your parachute, chest and leg straps. Also, check both cockpits for loose gear. Some bad accidents have been caused by loose gear jamming the controls. It can be pretty disconcerting when you're doing acrobatics. Now, the first thing you do when you get in the cockpit is to adjust your seatbelt and fasten it. There's no kidding about this. Too many boys have been killed because they didn't make proper use of their seatbelt. Take the student who got his nose too high on takeoff. His instructor snapped the stick forward to prevent a stall. When he looked back a moment later, the student wasn't there. The abrupt change in the plane's attitude had thrown him clear out of the cockpit. That student had probably figured there'd be plenty of time to fasten his seatbelt after they were in the air. In inverted flight and in most acrobatics, sometimes even in normal flight in rough air, the seatbelt is the only thing that keeps you in the airplane. So fasten your seatbelt the very first thing when you get in the cockpit. Now, these are shoulder straps. There's a little lever on the lower left side of the seat which releases the harness in such a way that a spring on the back of the seat gives it a certain amount of stretch. With the harness unlocked, adjust the straps for moderately snug fit. For takeoffs, landings, and acrobatics, lean back, lock the harness so that the spring will no longer allow it to stretch. In case of an accident, it'll hold you back against the seat and keep you from breaking your neck by banging your head against the instrument panel or cowling. After you fasten the seat belt, draw up on the straps at the side until the belt is tight enough to keep you in the plane, but not too tight for comfort.
Yes, sir. Mighty important, that seat belt. It even saves lives on the ground. Yes, for once Mac has done something right. His seat belt is securely fastened.
Gas off, switch off.
Leave it to Mac. If this ever happens to you, leave your seat belt fastened until someone comes out to let you down gently.
Now that your seat belt and shoulder straps are properly adjusted and fastened, drop your hand to the lower right side of your seat. Pull up on the little lever you'll find there. That allows your seat to move up and down. Now adjust the seat so that if you look straight along the top of the fuselage, your line of vision will run directly through the center of the windshield. Release the lever and make sure your seat is locked. Now you're ready to adjust your rudder pedals. Push that little metal lever on each pedal to the inside. Adjust pedals so you have full throw and can comfortably apply brake without stretching. And so you can rest your heels comfortably on the deck with the balls of your feet placed lightly against the pedals, with your knees relaxed and the weight of your legs on your heels. Then make sure each lever is back in locked position. Now operate the pedals slowly, giving full throw both ways, and watch the rudder to see that it responds properly. Move the stick from side to side and watch the ailerons. Move it fore and aft and watch the elevators. Move the controls evenly so that you can feel any variation in pressures which might indicate that something is wrong. Now glance down to your left, and there on the side of the cockpit is the trim tab regulator. Its functions will be demonstrated later on. Meanwhile, just set it at neutral with the handle pointing straight up. In making the cockpit check, you will always begin at the extreme left and work from left to right, clear across the cockpit, covering each control and instrument. That way, you're not likely to forget anything. In this airplane, the cockpit check begins with the trim tab regulator and moves next to the throttle and mixture control. Set the mixture, the lower red handle, for full rich, and open the throttle about an inch. Still further forward, underneath the instrument panel, is a red valve which turns on the gasoline, allows it to flow from the fuel tank down into the engine. Turn this to the on position. Directly above on the instrument panel is the ignition switch, which we've already mentioned. But check it again by sight and by feel to be sure it's off. Your plane captain's life may depend on it. Now we come to the instruments. Reading left to right, there's first the airspeed indicator, which, as we've pointed out, is somewhat like the speedometer on an automobile. At this point, it should read 0. Next, the altimeter. It tells you how high the plane is above sea level. You set it for field elevation before each flight. This is a turn and bank indicator. It'll prove invaluable to you later on, but for the present, forget it. The tachometer tells you how fast your engine is running in terms of revolutions per minute. Should now read 0. The oil pressure should also read 0, and the oil temperature should be about the same as the temperature of the outside air, or warmer if the plane has been flown or warmed up recently. This handle operates the engine fire extinguisher. It releases a bottle of CO2 in the engine, which will put out most engine fires. But don't pull it just to see what will happen.
In fact, you won't need to pull it just to see what happens, because we're going to show you. The inimitable Mac will demonstrate.
Engine fire extinguisher. I wonder how it works.
it's out of commission. Let's see. You just pull the handle. Yes. The engine will usually quit when you use the engine fire extinguisher. You make an emergency landing, perhaps in somebody's cornfield. You phone in, and you have some very embarrassing explaining to do. There's no discredit attached to an emergency landing, you understand, provided it's unavoidable. But emergencies such as this one are a needless risk of the student's life and of Navy equipment.
Use the engine fire extinguisher only if there's a fire in the engine. If any other part of the plane catches fire, use the cockpit fire extinguisher. As part of your cockpit check, better be sure the cockpit fire extinguisher is properly secured so it won't come loose when you don't want it to. Now you're ready to start the engine. But first, a word about the plane captain. His job is a tough and a thankless one, without glamour, and he deserves your consideration. The plane captain's a busy man. He has other planes to start besides yours, so he may want to start cranking before you're ready to go. Don't let him do it. Before he starts cranking, he must challenge you with...
Yes, son. Switch off.
He must not start cranking until you reply to his challenge. If he does, ask him to wait. Then, when you are ready, give him a nod, and when he says...
Yes, son. Switch off.
You very quickly check your gas valve and ignition, then answer his challenge. Gas on, switch off. Plane captain will then prime the engine and crank it. And while he's cranking it, hold the brake. This you do by pushing into your toes on the top of the rudder pedal. Holding the brake keeps the plane from rocking back and forth while cranking, and thus makes the plane captain's job easier and safer. When the inertia starting mechanism is turning over at a good rate, the plane captain will stand clear of the propeller and challenge you,
All clear.
meaning that he and all other personnel and equipment are out of the way of the propeller. If the area looks all clear to you, you answer his challenge, all clear. Then he immediately challenges you,
Contact.
and you reply, contact. Then you quickly turn the switch to both. Whatever you do, don't pump the throttle. It does not help to start the engine, but it does overload the carburetor, thus creating a fire hazard. As soon as your engine starts, take a look at your oil pressure gauge. If within a half a minute it doesn't come up to the minimum operating pressure specified in the pilot's handbook for that particular plane, the engine must be stopped quickly to prevent damage. If you have the type of plane in which the crank is carried in the baggage compartment, throttle back a little so that the plane captain can stow the crank without having his hat blown off. But listen to that engine. Don't let it die. Throttle slowly if it starts to miss. And watch the plane captain while he buttons up the baggage compartment. Ensure the fastenings are secure. Now turn your attention to the oil temperature gauge. Keep the engine turning over at 800 to 900 RPM until the minimum specified oil temperature has been reached. Then you're ready to test your mag. First, look around behind you. Be sure the area is clear.
Yes. And this is one of the many ways in which our friend Mac wins friends and influences people.
Take a good look aft to see that all is clear. Then put on your brakes. Continue to hold them on. Hold the stick all the way back to keep your tail down. Gradually advance the throttle until you're turning up 1,400 RPM. Now turn the ignition switch from both to left. Watch the tachometer. If it falls off more than 100 RPM, the plane's not airworthy. Next, turn the ignition switch back to both and wait until any lost RPMs are picked up again. Then turn the ignition switch to right. Again, you should not lose more than 100 revolutions per minute. Return the switch to both and ease the throttle all the way back. With the engine idling, turn the ignition switch to the off position for just an instant. To be sure, it'll turn the engine off. Now, if the plane has passed your inspection and testing, you're ready to taxi out for the takeoff. But suppose that sometime during the inspection you find something wrong. Let's take an imaginary case. First, you call for the plane captain. It may be that he can fix the trouble in a few minutes. And he, in turn, may call the line chief. But if they can't fix the trouble or you're not satisfied the plane is airworthy, contact the duty officer. Describe to him the difficulty that made you reject the plane and ask him for instructions. That's the procedure if you find something wrong with the plane. Now, stopping the plane is a relatively simple matter. Set the throttle so the engine will operate at 800 to 1,000 RPM and let it run that way for about a minute to cool it off. Then bring the mixture control back to the full lean position. This will kill the engine. When the prop has stopped turning, turn off the ignition switch immediately and open the throttle all the way. Move the mixture control to full rich and close the gas valve.